Photo sharing has opened our eyes to the world like never before, and it's having a huge impact on travel. Destinations go viral and can get swamped by visitors. Is the Instagram effect ruining tourism? Welcome to Roundtable. Hello, I'm Simon McGregor-Wood. How do you choose where to go on holiday? More and more people are picking their destination based on what will look good on their social media feed.
Bragging to friends about our travel destinations isn't new, but with access to a large global audience at their fingertips, social media influencers' eye-catching posts are creating a scramble to visit the same places. Previously unknown beauty spots are now struggling to cope with growing numbers. Norway's Trolltunga viewpoint had only 800 visitors annually in 2010. It has now over 100,000. Vienna's tourism board launched the Unhatched AG Vienna campaign in late 2018 to encourage visitors to put their smartphones away and instead see the city behind your pics. In the USA, the Leave No Trace campaign has released social media guidelines encouraging visitors not to share specific locations through geotagging to protect fragile outdoor environments. But social media influencers can help to bring visitors and money into a region and create jobs for local people. With a growing middle class in countries like China and India, a surge in global independent travel is expected, leaving destinations to deal with ever greater numbers. And with our camera phones ever present, can any place escape being photographed and remain unknown?
Time to introduce our guests. Joining us from Boulder, Colorado is Dana Watts, Executive Director of the Outdoor Educational Center Leave No Trace. And at the round table we have Charlie Wild, Instagram influencer and co-founder of the Travel Project, Martin Dunford, co-founder of the Rough Guide Travel Books, and Benjamin Humby from PMYB, an influencer marketing agency. Thank you everyone for joining us, particularly Dana in Colorado, where I think it's very, very early in the morning. I'd like to start with Charlie Wild, a travel influencer.
Technically speaking, yeah.
Absolutely, the centre of the storm that we're trying to dissect at the moment. Give us an impression of what it is that you've been up to, what it is that you do, and at what point you realised that there might be some negative consequences of the things that you've been up to.
Yeah, well, I'll try and condense our sort of whirlwind journey into a few sentences, and hopefully that will give a little bit of insight. I used to work in advertising, as did my girlfriend, Jess, and we quit that world to travel the world, but we tried to and do a unique take on travel, which was seeing the world through local eyes. We've been doing that for 2 years now. The intention was actually to see if we could travel the world and meet as many local people as possible and live through their eyes, essentially. So initially the intention wasn't to post it everywhere. We began to document it after a couple of weeks and months when we realised that we wanted to keep a log of it, essentially. And over time we grew a little community. We got a bit of press on our project. I think
little community, define little community.
Well,
how many followers?
We're small, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things. At the moment we've got 23,000 followers on Instagram. We've got a little following on our blog. So a small, like I say, in the scale of things, community, but there's a responsibility because these people listen to us. And I think about halfway through the project, we realised that people are going to the places that we are going to. And that was quite a big moment for us when we realised we need to be careful about the message we're conveying.
Were you choosing remote, rural places, out-of-the-way places?
Well, by nature of our project, we were choosing the places that locals told us to go to. They guided our journey completely. So it would be anything from a big city to a tiny rural village that no one had heard of. However, our emphasis was always to tell the story through their eyes. So not to kind of have an irresponsible, in my opinion, attitude, which essentially would be to kind of just show a snapshot of a location and not actually tell the story of the culture and the people that live there.
All right, thanks for that. Martin Dunford next, please. Old school travel writing, no emphasis on the old, but the more traditional form of, I remember going backpacking around Europe and the Middle East, you'd take a rough guide with you and you'd read the recommendations of places to stay and what to eat and the sites. I think you are a skeptic about the influence of social media on travel. Is that correct? And what do you think are the downsides that we need to be wary of?
I'm not so much a skeptic. I mean, I think social media is a great tool. And I love the directness of it, the way that travel writers, it enables travel writers to talk direct to their readers. It's very experiential, it's very immediate. And it's funny listening to Charlie because it seems very similar to our journey. And once upon a time, Rough Guides wasn't very traditional. It was kind of against the grain. And we were people who either we gave up our jobs or we didn't have jobs. And we went to travel the world. And we went to travel the world. And at the time, travel writing was a rather sort of anodyne thing, which wasn't really very interested in destinations, wasn't very interested in locals. We were kind of interested in both, not seeing as countries as museums. So that was our impulse was the same. I just think that a lot of social media and a lot of the so-called influencers, a lot of the ones that I'm aware of, their journey is more about them. It's less about the destination. Yeah. It's great to hear Charlie talking about engaging with local people, actually without a guidebook, which to some extent can cocoon you a little bit. And I think it's a lot of the time it's about the traveller's kind of psychological journey, or it's a fashion shoot, lots of swimsuits, lots of exotic locations, and it's quite shallow. And that's what sometimes is a bit disappointing.
All right. Dana, can I turn to you next, all the way over there in Colorado? I've never been, but I know that it's a huge destination for the tourism industry. I'm reading here 400 million visitors annually to US national parks, a good number of which are in your state. You're running an organization that's called Leave No Trace. Obviously, it gives me the impression that you've suffered some of the negative consequences of this social media travel explosion. Can you give an impression of what some of those things have been and what it is you're trying to educate people away from?
So really, Leave No Trace is about protecting outdoor spaces, and that includes parks, forests, river corridors, any kind of outdoor natural lands today. And we really feel like the best way to do that is to empower people with skills and information to care for these places while they're outside. You are absolutely right. Colorado has positioned itself as a state that offers world-class outdoor recreation. We have 14,000-foot peaks, more than any other state here in the U.S. The world number one world-class river corridor that's traveled and floated, and so there's so many things to do and see, and it brings 87 million visitors. With so many people getting outside today, one of the best ways that we can maintain and protect the land, the integrity and the health of the land for the future, is to provide people with skills to leave no trace of their visit. And that's just minimizing basic skills to minimize your impacts when you're outside. And so we are seeing some of those impacts, a lot of those impacts, more so than others depending on the environment. Some areas are obviously more fragile than others. We're seeing impacts to wildlife, trails,
To
parks,
what extent, Dana, sorry to
things.
interrupt, to what extent do you make the connection today in your recent experience of this phenomenon with the social media phenomenon? Because some of the things you're outlining, of course, could well have happened 20 years ago, people not knowing how to behave appropriately in wildlife environments. But have you noticed this extraordinary peak in volume? We call it over-tourism, don't we? Is that something that you are specifically responding to?
We are specifically responding to that. I can't say that we as an organization are noticing because we are not on the ground per se, but we work directly with the land managers in this country, and they are absolutely noticing the increase. It's more the increase of people and visitation and impacts to specific areas that were undiscovered or were less known before social media and before geotagging really became so popular in the last, say, 5 to 10 years.
Dana, I'm going to cut you off there. I want to come back to that because geotagging
Sure.
is another buzzword that we need to kind of explain and explore.
Sure.
But I want to bring in our last panelist, Ben Humby. You are an agent for influencers. You're part of the growing commercial side of this business, about which I think some of us are not so familiar. So can you give us a little bit of a better understanding of what you do, the extent to which you're aware of this problem, and what you, as on the commercial side of it, are trying to do to mitigate some of the negative consequences?
So what I do, I come from a background of delivering campaigns for large clients, from likes of hotels, from travel boards, and connecting them with influencers. The influencer industry, as we spoke about earlier, is fairly fresh. It's not that experienced in terms of how to fully utilise it to its best capabilities, and we're constantly learning how to do so. One of the main things we actually do is to connect the right influencers with the brand themselves or with the tourist board, with hotels. How we do that is we look at key things in terms of credibility, making sure things that people create are organic. In my experience, and where I noticed this could be becoming a problem, is where you had clients, you had hotel chains that had a really specific way that they wanted their brand and their messaging to be put across. But actually what we want to do is when we're utilising influencers, when influencers are creating content, that all messaging should be organic, real and truthful. So then when their followers see this messaging, when their followers take into account the content they're creating, that is truthful, and people can't just be paying for their own message to be portrayed. So that's what we do, and how we've adapted is we're educating the influencers on their end in terms of what they should be creating, as well as the brands and what they could be looking for and how they should be promoting themselves.
What are the commercial incentives for an influencer? I mean, what kind of money are these people making? Charlie, can you give me an impression of, it's a living for you, right?
It can be extremely profitable. It's a
Who
numbers
pays
game.
you?
So it could be a brand, it could be a tourist board. There are multiple ways in which you can generate revenue.
And you tell these people, you tell operators in the area are going to visit, we're coming, we're influencers, can you pay my fare? Is that how it works?
A lot of the time they'll get in contact with you and they'll say, we want to promote X, and this is how we want to do it. We think you're a good fit. And then the process is we look at it and we think, is this right for our community? As in, is it going to resonate? Are we going to be kind of telling them a story that they're going to be interested in? And is it right ethically is the question that I think a lot of people don't ask. And that's touching on Ben's point about it being an emerging industry. People aren't kind of checking themselves on the ethical front.
So back to Ben, your stable of influencers, forgive me, I don't know how many you have or what the turnover is, but have you ever had to say to people, what you did last week in Sweden, that's not okay? I mean, do you have the sort of power to discipline your team? Yeah.
First of all, how it starts is we look at the influencer's interest before any monetary conversations are taking place. We need to make sure people are interested. If people are on board with a brand and the messaging and how it's going to be created and what they're doing, chances are when you go forward with a campaign, they're not really going to do anything wrong. In terms of the way we monitor it, we speak closely with everyone we're working with to make sure we have do's and don'ts of what they're doing. Speak to people in the local area, the communities, anyone we're sending people out to make sure that people are doing things truthfully and creating good messaging. In terms of what we can do afterwards is, as an agency, how we communicate with our influencers, we go back and look at what they've done right, what they've done wrong, how they've interacted with their audience, because these guys, some of them have millions of followers. The things that they say, people believe. So if they'd say certain things about certain areas which is incorrect, then it can have a massive effect. So that's why we're really, really heavily, as an agency and myself, on educating influencers and brands to do things right, because the power they have is incredible.
Tourism is a wonderful industry. Are we being a bit sort of over cautious about protecting places? I mean, everyone's got the right to make a living, haven't they?
I think it's wrong to sort of single out social media as having a sort of a bad effect on these places. I mean, the problem is mass tourism, and that's kind of 100 years old. And it's one part of that. I feel quite neutral about the effect of social media on places. I don't feel neutral about the effects of mass tourism. And of course, I'm sort of part of that. I've been part of it for a long time. So I feel partially responsible. What's going to happen in the next 100 years as the Indian and Chinese middle classes want to travel more and they want to go to Colorado, that seems to me more of a problem we need to address than the specifics of social media. I mean, for me, the problem of the social media side of things is that when we started Rough Guides, it was a clear transaction. We produced travel information for people who wanted to travel, go somewhere they knew nothing about, and they paid us for that. Now, I kind of like the sort of more honest convergence of the travel industry with travel writers and travellers, if you like. But sometimes it's quite a complicated balancing act for your influencers to be honest about the places they go to, and also do the job that the people who are paying them want them to do. No, you know, I've seen a lot of people who have obviously been paid by tourist boards. I don't want to watch them sort of sitting in swanky hotels in Abu Dhabi and doing stuff that no one else can afford to do, leaving aside the sort of environmental concerns. It's no fun to watch someone doing that.
Dana, in terms of the kind of environmental consequences, obviously the United States is a first world country. It's pretty well set up to deal with mass tourism. But are you in Colorado getting to the stage, whether on the back of social media or not, of saying to certain places you cannot let more than X number of people a week onto your site. Are we getting to that state of affairs?
You know, in some places we are. And I would say that, yes, the US is set up for tourism. The scale of tourism that we're starting to see, and I think you're exactly right, we are only going to see more and more. I'm not sure we're set up to handle that type of mass tourism. We have our agencies, our public land management agencies here, including the National Park Service and the Forest Service, and they are struggling with the numbers and what to do about the impacts that they're starting to see. And so they're really considering different things, putting different things in place, including permit systems where you really have almost like a reservation system where you have to have a permit to go into certain areas at certain times. One of the things that we're trying to do is to bring a message of leave no trace and planning and preparing and getting to your area before and having all the information that you need and minimizing your impact, getting that message to visitors before they actually arrive at their final destination. So we're avoiding some of these impacts that we see when people come either ill prepared or less prepared. But I think it's an infrastructure issue that the US is absolutely going to be dealing with, and it's not going to be an easy one.
It strikes me that, it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because if you're seeing a wonderful photo by an influencer of a remarkably remote place in the Himalayas or in some desert, I mean, you don't really want infrastructure there, do you? But if you want 10,000 people a month, you have to start building car parks and another regional airport and a train link. I mean, it's just a sort of self-defeating prophecy, isn't it?
In a way, I mean, nothing really changes. Travel's been an aspirational activity for quite a long time, and browsing the internet is a kind of leisure activity in itself. It's possible that a lot of people are looking at these great pictures, and they're never going to go to any of these places. They spend a lot of time browsing them and watching travel videos online, but a lot of them aren't going to go. So to some extent, it's not an issue as far as that sort of channel is concerned. The issue is mass tourism for me.
Right. But I mean, as a trigger of getting people to sort of drop what they're doing and planning, in the age of sort of treating aeroplanes like buses, this notion of seeing someone that you admire taking a photograph and next weekend you're there.
It's
a
one
much more
trigger
immediate world,
many,
isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
And to that extent, I mean, to what extent do we think that the genie's out of the bottle? There's no way we can take people's smartphones away from. Can we tell the Chinese and the Indians not to develop and not to allow their burgeoning middle classes to get on airplanes? It's impossible.
Right? That's a really good point. I think that's one that we talk about a lot. Instagram's here to stay. You like it or hate it, it's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. But the word influence can go both ways. You can have a negative impact on a destination, but you can also have a positive impact. And if the behaviour of people like myself begins to change, we're a little bit more educated, we can go to destinations that are beautiful and outdoors, but tell the full story and not just the snapshot. I think sometimes I've been to some beautiful national parks in America, and you go to what's called an Instagram spot, and it's an awful experience. There's a queue.
A thing. That's a real thing.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a queue to the moment where you can be photographed without anyone else around you, but that square is all you see. The rest of the 360 degrees, you've got people in a queue.
It's marked off or signposted, or does everyone in the community know about it?
Well, it's a geotag thing, actually, so you can look it up, and it's Insta-famous, which is a horrendous saying, but it's a real thing.
All right, tell me more. I'll play the part of the ignorant person, not difficult. Talk to me more about geotagging. You take a photo and you post it. Is it automatically geotagged, or is that something you have to take a conscious decision? Ben,
So
how does that work?
Nowadays, Instagram's got so many new features that you can tag locations. You can tag locations live. You can even choose a certain spot,
To
location.
the nearest yard or meter? Or
To the nearest yard. And what you can do, I know friends of mine have done the same, you can look in locations beforehand, before you're planning a holiday. You can go on maps, you can look at what's happening there and then within the 24 hours, so you can see all the Instagram stories that people are posting. So you can actually see live updates right there and then of what is happening in that location at that time, what it looks like. Is this really what's happening there? I've seen these pictures on the website, does it actually look like that?
Right.
So in some senses it can be great because you can get genuine, credible live feeds of what's going on. Then also I get the way that people can overuse this, and then there is crowding in specific areas. You've got these Instagrammable places which people are going to.
And Dana, I mean, leaving no trace, presumably in your book, would also include don't geotag. Is that something that you're trying to message?
We definitely we don't use the word don't, and so we shy away from kind of black and white scenarios. And this was mentioned. We want people just to think before, so it's kind of a stop and think situation. So instead of sending and plugging in your exact coordinates, especially to places that aren't in a national park necessarily, or an Instagram or Insta famous area, if it's much lesser known, or it's a pristine or a sensitive, fragile environment, we're really asking people to think twice about sending exact coordinates, and maybe sending general information about an area. But this is, again, it's part of being responsible as an influencer. And as we know, influencers have a lot of influence. So I think it also, I would reiterate that point, that it can be, social media doesn't have to be a real negative platform. It can be a very positive thing for people. And in particular, influencers can play a really positive role and provide messaging that is more about responsible use, or general leave no trace, or fashionable leave no trace moments, people doing the right thing. That can be a very positive part of a movement for change that social media could really could play a positive role in, and influencers can play a positive
You're
role
obviously
in.
you're not alone in this sort of pushback or this mission to educate. We've got this unhashtag thing going on, Unhatched Vienna. I don't know if anyone here has heard of that.
I've heard of it, yeah.
The city of Vienna saying, guys, if you come to Vienna, more than welcome, but don't just see it as a kind of photo opportunity.
Yeah.
Put the camera down, put the phone down, and enjoy it in a slightly more mature, engaging way. Is that a reasonable campaign platform, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think the thing with Instagram is a strange beast, because it's exploded onto the scene, it's taken everyone by storm, and then we haven't been quite prepared for it. Tourism boards, countries, travel companies to an extent have been taken by surprise by this kind of almost hysteria. And the next wave was always going to be a backlash, because there were going to be negative effects, and they need to be addressed. There needs to be some sort of lens, spotlight put on the industry to say, look, guys, we need to change our behaviour. So people like that, people who are encouraging less hashtagging, a more organic, genuine interaction with a location, that's going to pick up traction, and that's a great thing. The industry needs change, and it will happen, and it's happening quickly, which is also encouraging.
What about the more sort of the wider sort of societal concept of narcissism?
Yeah.
Because we are living in a narcissistic age. We go to places and people are taking pictures of themselves, and you sort of want to sort of turn them around and say, look at it. Don't have to capture this place. Why don't you just enjoy it?
Yeah.
That's a problem with society, isn't it? I mean,
definitely. I mean, I can't honestly say it's not, because that would be me lying. I think that the narcissistic side of social media again needs addressing, and I think it can be used as a kind of tool to make people feel like they're inadequate. I think this FOMO generation of people who feel like they're missing out on.
What does that mean? That stands
for fear of missing out.
Oh yeah.
Which is in
That's
itself
plagued my life.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are scared of that, and influencers, I think, get a bad rep a lot of the time because they're kind of establishing that fear within people.
Ben, it's all your fault. No, but I mean, you're part of a growing business that is kind of feeding this insecurity, putting us at the centre of everything. Answer the charge.
I think with that, it's taking on responsibility. And as you were saying, it's a fresh industry, and people are only realising their power, influencers especially, realising how much influence they do have over their audience. So find a way to educate people, communicate together to make sure everyone knows what their opinions are and how we can fix this and combat this. As well as talking to influencers, communicate with followers, figure out what does influence them, what do they trust in, what are they seeing which is negative. You see reality TV stars now that have going on TV programs, coming fresh out of that with no education of the power that they now have. Just educating people, but first of all, coming together, communicating to figure out what we should be discussing and how we can fix the problem, which as an agency, we're in a perfect position to speak to the brands, speak to the tourist boards, find out what they're looking for, speak to influencers as well, and communicate and figure out what the best way is forward, because it is a problem and we do need to fix it.
I seem to remember, Martin, on the back cover of my beaten up rough guides, you might have got a photo as the writer on the back cover, but not front and centre of every page.
It's very interesting
changed,
because it's changed so much. I remember in the very first rough guides, we thought that having a few maps was a little bit of a luxury, and I think it took maybe 10 years for us to start putting photos in the books. It was very much about information to sort of enable people. I think that was wrong. Photos inspire, they engage people, and all of that's good. But it's kind of gone completely around the other way. So it's all about kind of image and being in the right place at the right time, and that fear of missing out thing. It's not about the places that you're going to, or the people you're talking to there, or meeting, or the food you're eating there. You know, the substance of travel has kind of become.
It's a very fast-paced, technology-driven phenomenon. I think I get the impression that we're all trying to understand the weaknesses, and we're trying to work out how to
sort of
control
me-driven kind of thing, which
Correct.
is what it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Dana, thank you very much for joining us from Colorado. Guys, thanks for coming into the studio. Fascinating subject. As ever, we need more time, but we've run out. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Remember, you can see more debate and discussion on our YouTube channel. Just search for TRT World Roundtable. But from now, from me and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.